Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Robert Martinez. Robert is a senior executive with over 25 years experience in driving strategic growth and operational excellence in the energy sector. Robert, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Robert Martinez. I'm originally from Laredo, Texas, a border town south of Texas. Grew up in Laredo, went to college and got a petroleum engineering degree at Texas A&M, where I met my wife and where my two kids are currently studying. Started internationally with YPF. I worked in the field, worked my way up, worked for XTO, Exco Resources, started my own private equity-backed company. Now I'm one of the vice presidents of operations for Crescent Energy here in Irving. Our company's out of Houston, and I'm also the Society of Petroleum Engineers, one of the 3 regional directors for North America.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So how did you actually get started off in the energy sector then?
So I really had no intention to join the oil and gas industry. I was a STEM engineering kid, in high school, wanted to be an engineer. And at the time, maybe people didn't talk about engineering the same way they do today. They're more talking about engineers that run the trains. And so I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I didn't know what kind. And one day I got a phone call from a mentor who was one of the program directors and said, "Hey, Robert, they're looking for interns in the summer in this oil and gas company. Do you remember the speaker?" I said, "Yeah, I remember the speaker." He says, "Well, go talk to them." So I walked into the office, met with, and I'll tell you his name because he's been a great mentor, Fidel Santos, who was a Longhorn. I'm an Aggie, and you can imagine how that went. Actually, he was really, really good. And he asked me, "Do you know how to program?" I said, "I do." And I did. I used to write my own games as a kid and in basic programming languages. And he says, "Well, when can you start?" I said, "Well, Monday." Funny story about that. I actually wanted to go work for TxDOT. And it was close to my house, where my parents' house where I grew up. And they never called me back. As soon as I got home from that interview and I had taken the job with this oil company, TxDOT calls and says, "Hey, Robert, can you come in? We'd like to hire you." I said, "I can't do that. I just took this job literally 2 hours ago, and I start Monday." And they said, "Well, what are they paying you?" And I told them, and they beat it by $1 an hour. And I said, I can't do that. I've already told them that I'm coming. So long story short, I started oil and gas working as an intern writing programs, which became a daily drilling reporting program. Now it's commercial and everybody has, a version of that. And that experience was so good that I went back to school and changed my major to petroleum engineering from mechanical engineering, and the rest is history.
That's interesting because there is a lot of mechanical engineers in the energy sector. There has been for quite a while. What made you change from mechanical to go into petroleum?
Well, I started mechanical because it was the broadest at the time and probably the one that could work across most industries. And that's something that I had actually, now I have a son who's an engineering major, thought that that'd probably be best for him to go into mechanical because it's pretty broad and gives you an opportunity to do something. But for me personally, that experience was so good that I thought I should really get to know this industry and really have a much more broader foundation in oil and gas if I'm going to work in it. And thankfully, it worked out pretty well for me. I was asked back. I got out of school in 1998, 1999 when oil was $8 a barrel. And so it was a tough time to do it, which maybe at the time made me wish that I had done mechanical engineering instead of petroleum. But I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to have an opportunity to work in the industry, even when oil was $8 a barrel. And lo and behold, my position began in the Amazon jungle with a backpack and a cardboard box. And so it was a good start. It was an interesting start. But that opportunity was pretty short-lived. And, like they say, when one door closes, another opens. And thankfully for me, my career has been full of doors opening. And so I'm very fortunate to still be in the industry 25 plus years in.
Yeah, it is quite amazing because I do know that during some of the downturns, I know that a lot of people have come out of the energy sector, especially the oil, How do you continue to get doors to open for you? Do you do anything unique?
Well, that depends on who you ask, right? Not that doors aren't always open, right? And sometimes the doors that you expect open are not the ones that are in place. For example, when I started in the Amazon, I was there, and literally 2 months into it, the company got bought out and they sent all expats home. And I went home, I got laid off. And so that's something that happens quite a bit in our industry. And, you have to be prepared for that at any time in your career. Even 25 years later, that's still a very real risk for a lot of folks. I know several colleagues today that are out looking for something to do, very, very capable people. But what that did for me is it caused me to go back and reflect and try to look at things in a different way. Like, what am I good at? What am I not good at? What do I think I'm good at? And honestly, when you're right out of college, there's not a lot of things you're good at. And so that led me to a thought process to say, you know what, I just need to get better at what I do. I'm going to take a job in the field, even if it means I have to swing a hammer to learn the industry from the ground up. And that's what I did. I moved to East Texas, again, packed a pickup full of my belongings and went to work for a service company, got a commercial driver license, and I drove a crane unit to start. I mean, because that was a progression at the time. You started on the ground like everybody else, swinging a hammer before you move up into a full-time engineering role. And so that was kind of how that went for me. So the longest story of it is you don't always have all the doors open, but if you consistently put in a good work, and that things are going to come your way. You just have to put yourself in position to have that opportunity. And sometimes you're going to do jobs maybe that you don't care for very long, but that's just part of the business.
Do you really think that if you put the hard work in, that doors will automatically open?
Automatically, no. I learned that 10 years into my career. When I was 10 years into my career, I felt like I was really, really good at what I did at the time for that particular role. And then I saw people move past me that I knew didn't have the same skill set. It was very frustrating. And I'm sure there's people, your listeners and viewers, that they may be in that situation. What I've learned at that point was, and you've heard this before, it's not only what you know, it's who you know. And I didn't necessarily believe and subscribe to that early in my career. I thought if you were the best at what you did, things would happen and you get opportunities, but that doesn't necessarily ring true anymore. And so the network of people that you surround yourself with, the people that you interact with, how you treat them, how you interact with them is very, very important. And so that's something that I learned, that part of it. It was not something that I was good at and I had to work on. And that's actually how I got involved in the Society of Petroleum Engineers. One of my mentors said, Robert, you need to get involved with this group. This is a good group of people. You'll meet a lot of interesting folks. And so I did. I got involved in the local Dallas chapter, even though I was involved in chapters before that, but not to the level that I was here. And I met some of the most incredible people. And now serving in my third year of 3 as a director on the board of directors for SPE, I met some of the most incredible people I never thought I'd meet across the globe. And learning their perspective and what makes their business tick is different than what makes ours tick here in the United States, particularly on the U.S. shale. And so it's very interesting to put yourself in the position of other folks and see how they see the world and how they see our industry.
It is. It's amazing, and SP are an amazing. They are an amazing group. I've been working. We're trying to work with them on a few different things for myself, so which is quite exciting as well.
I think you had our CEO on there, Simon Seaton, on your video here not long
Yes,
ago. So Simon's a great person. Really excited to have him on board. He's doing a fantastic job.
he is actually, and he's an amazing person. Actually, I've had dealings with him and quite a few times as well. Yeah, I have a lot of time for Simon. Quite an amazing person. So, how do you deal with maybe being passed over for promotion? There's probably loads of our listeners, younger listeners, could be frustrated about that.
This is something that's can be pretty common, and this is not just our industry or me or anybody else. This is just sometimes how life is, right? I think things happen for a reason, right? And so I sincerely believe that if you put in the effort and you really work hard to get good at your craft, and you take the time to meet others and take the time to network, opportunities will come. And it may not be the opportunity you hope for or the opportunity in front of you, but there'll be some opportunity of some sort. You just need to stay the course on that. But you have to do something different every once in a while. You have to retool. If you stay with the same way and same approach, it doesn't always work. So you have to be willing to do that. And sometimes you have to be willing to do a job that isn't exactly the most glamorous. like driving a truck and swinging a hammer, or working an asset that's not an asset that's, you consider to be top tier, and that's okay. That's just part of the job and part of being a good team player. And then you get an opportunity in your company or in another company that's willing to give you that responsibility that you can do. So
I mean, that is great advice. I was going to ask you, because you've worked your way up from the bottom, which I did as well, actually, do you think it really helps you when you become up to senior management to have a better perspective of just running a company?
I really do. I really do. And I'll tell you why, because when you start leading a group of people, you start at the bottom, you're going to be a good team player, you're going to be a good soldier, you're going to do what they ask you to do. But when you start leading a group of people, they're not going to believe in you unless you know what it's like to live a day in the life in their shoes. So when you have folks that work for you, that trust you, that know you've known the job and you've done that job before, and you're asking them to do something, 9 times out of 10, you're going to ask them to do something that you've done before and you know how to do it. So there's a trust there, and there's a transparency as a leader that it's important. And this is one of the recommendations I make to students across the world when I have a chance to speak in front of them, is that don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to go work for a service company. Don't be afraid to start at the bottom. I think it's a critical skill to know how the plane is built before you get to fly in one, let alone fly one. So I think it's important to understand every bit and piece at some point. Is it necessary to be a good leader? No. There's some great managers and leaders of people who understand what they don't know, and I think that's just as important as a skill. Know what you don't know, but make sure that you can get the people in place that do know what they're doing, and put them in a position to succeed, and then stay out of their way.
Okay, but how would you typically go about doing that?
You're talking about when you bring in teammates. Well, I think one
Yeah.
of it is you have to know your people. Like you have to understand their backgrounds. You have to understand their education. You have to understand their experiences. You can't lead a team if you have no idea what their competencies are. So first and foremost, whether you're new to the team or the team's there, and you bring in a team or you're brought into the team, you have to understand who they are. You got to know a little bit about them. And then you have to get to know the person behind the person. I think at the end of the day, this industry is all about people and relationships. The well names change, the company names change, the assets change, but ultimately the people are the most important part of this industry. And anyone that tells you otherwise is not really good at what they do. You have to understand that people make this industry go round. The numbers have to work, and I certainly understand and respect that. But if you got good people, you have to believe that good people are going to take you to the right asset, to the right business plan, and to the right returns that maybe your investors or other folks are expecting from you.
Okay, but then is it easier? I mean, because I've worked on a lot of projects, and it can sometimes be easier integrating into a new team rather than being handed an existing team. Do you think that's right?
So my thoughts on that depend on the situation, but generally speaking, if you are bringing a person into a new team, you have to give them the opportunity to bring in their aces. Like, you got to give them the opportunity to bring people that they trust, that they've worked with, that they know, because you're going to expect them to deliver results. And it's very difficult to bring someone in, or put someone in a position without giving them the tools that they're used to or the tools that they deal with. You can't really have a full functioning team and say, drop someone in and say, here, figure it out. You can do that, and a good leader will find a way to make those teammates work. But at some point or another, you got to give them the tools to do that. So I really think that's what's happening in this industry today.
Okay, but then I was just wondering as well, do you think that it's easier to be a manager in the same company rather than leave to go to another company and then be a manager there?
Those are very specific questions that you're asking me, but I'll tell you some of my thoughts on that. I think homegrown talent is important. I know when I was in a service side, this particular major service company who's still around did not promote from within. They would promote someone from within, but they transferred to a completely different division. And the thought process there was you're going to make a lot of mistakes as you work in your craft and you're learning to be part of the team. And all of a sudden you're moved into leadership role over those folks. There's going to be a little bit of tension and a little bit of lack of respect because they remember all your mistakes. So this particular company would move managers from other ones where no one really kind of knew that history. But I think when you're in a major company and you're operating, I think first and foremost you have to earn the respect of your peers as a leader. Both either for your competencies or how you treat people, or a combination of both. And so getting promoted from within and earning the respect of your peers, when your own peers are pushing in your direction, I think you've done something right. But sometimes the business needs something else, and the leadership needs something else, and that's okay. There's always opportunities for people, whether it's in the same business or going to another company. It just depends. In the old days, you used to have 35-year people that never left. Now I think it's more and more common that people are bouncing around every couple of years, every 5 to 7 years, and starting new.
Do you think it's it? I know. Gone are the days, especially when my parents were working, that you had long term longitude with the same company, maybe for 20, 20, 25 years, 30 years. Do you think that that's really gone nowadays?
I don't know if it's gone. I think every company is different. I can comment a little bit on the U.S. shale, part side of the business, is we've seen companies come and go. There's been hundreds of small companies, shale companies have come and gone. And really ultimately what I learned in 10 years into my career is that the engineers don't run the business, the finances run the business, the money runs the business. And once you understand that, you realize that their motivations and their goals are a little different than maybe the engineer's goals. And that's okay. But I do think that in this day and age, we need something now. You need results today. They can't wait for 20 years to develop. Either you know what you're doing now, or you quickly get there, or we'll find someone else who will. And that's generally how things work here in the U.S. as far as operators are concerned.
I think it's the same. I think all over the world, actually. I think a lot of companies are more results driven
Correct.
and looking after the pennies, I think. Do you think that's the right way?
I think every company is different. I mean, there is something to be said for loyalty and sticking with people who brought you to the dance, right? I
Yeah.
think there's an element to that, of loyalty, but at the same time, you have to deliver. Like you have to be good at what you do, or you have to at least have some promise and some potential to get where you need to be or where the company sees you need to be.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I do agree with that. But going back to to our younger audiences, how do they even prove to their managers that they are capable and eager and willing to put in the hours to come to become the best that they can be at their job so they can progress? Because that would be really hard.
It is very difficult in today's, like I have two children, one is 22 and one is 18, and it's very difficult now, where you're used to having satisfaction immediately. And I've mentored young students, over the years where they want to be the manager right away. And I get that. I love that ambition. I want that. I wanted that too. But generally, when you're a young person coming out of school and getting ready to work, they're hiring you for a particular role, and they expect you to do that role. Like they're not going through the effort of onboarding you and training you to get to that point. There needs to be some return on that investment into you, so that they can fill that role. So there is a point of, hey, we hired you for this, need you to do that role. If things continue to go well and you rise to the top, then there'll be other opportunities. And that's something that's very frustrating from young people sometimes, and can be very discouraging, because they'll come into a role and they already want to talk about the next promotion. And we're just not ready for that. And a lot of times, and I say this as someone who's had that, in my career. But you just stay the course, and good opportunities happen. You think that things are set when you come in, and then something happens in our industry and our company, and all bets are off. So the only consistent thing here in this industry right now is change, and there's going to be change. And I think we have to be comfortable with change, whether that's talking about renewables, whether that's talking about decarbonization, whether that's talking about unconventional in other parts of the world, or even here domestically or offshore. The only consistent thing is change.
I think so as well. But I was going to go back and say that I have seen, even when I've been going about in different jobs, that new graduates are now hired for a specific job and expected to hit the ground running, even with very little experience. I mean, that is really hard. I mean, even when I first started out, I mean, I got some sort of training scheme, and you made the best of what you were taught and run with it. But I don't even think they get that nowadays.
That was something we looked for when I was coming out of school. Everybody was looking to work for a major like Texaco or or Exxon, someone, and the first question that all of us would ask at the interviews, and some of you that are watching may do the same, is what kind of training program do you have? Right. And I think that was something where we needed someone to help us get acquainted and get comfortable with the industry and learn a little bit about it. And just, at least in the US shale part, like, we need you to go yesterday. And so that's very frustrating and very nerve wracking for a young person starting out, because they want to do a good job. And you may not have a structured training program, or you have, a role that you have to get up to speed yesterday. And that's very frustrating. But there is something to be said from learning that way. It's not ideal. It's not comfortable. But at the end of the day, you learn how to work well under pressure and work well with limited number of constraints, which is typically what an engineer has to deal with. That was one of the frustrations of my son. One of the projects he had to do things under budget, on time, and work on a load that was not ideal. And he said, Dad, I got all these constraints. How are we ever going to get this to work? I said, welcome to the world of engineering. You got to work within those constraints. And now we have additional forces coming from the outside, particularly on the regulatory side, that allows us and makes us have to work within those constraints as well.
I know. It is really hard as an engineer to work with constraints. What advice did you give your son then?
So for one, I welcomed him to the wonderful world of engineering, because, you have to work all these things that make it seem impossible. So what essentially you have to do is think outside the box. And there have been some projects in my career that were pretty difficult, that had never been worked on before, that I felt very responsible for that, and thinking, okay, I got to figure this out. And so you start thinking outside the box, you start drawing some things, and you turn it upside down and see what that yields, and so on and so forth. And you put together hypotheses, and hopefully you have a management team that supports you, says, you know what, I want to try that. Let's see if that works. And here's a justification for it. And then they give you the budget to go do it. And then you hope and pray that it works. I mean, I'll never forget when one of my companies did that to me on a project where I wanted one well test, and they gave me 4 well tests. And it was a little nerve wracking that we were going to spend that kind of money on what I thought was a pretty good project, but I wasn't sure if it was going to work. So I watched it from afar. I was on vacation when some of that was getting on, and thankfully it exceeded everybody's expectations. It became the standard going forward. But you got to be uncomfortable a little bit, and you got to be willing to put out some ideas. And I think as a management team, you can't stifle your young people. You got to give them an opportunity to make mistakes and to ask questions and let them learn.
I agree, actually. But sometimes I would think making a mistake early in your career, especially with some of it being so young, it would be absolutely devastating for them. I would think so.
So that's one of the things that one of my main mentors taught me, very senior mentor. He just said, slow down a little bit. Don't sweat the small stuff. But they say nowadays, you stop and smell the roses, right? Don't sweat the small stuff. And so while it may seem like the earth is coming down on you, at the end, the grand scheme of things, not a big deal. It's going to be fine. And so I tell all young people to think about that. Now, obviously, really make sure you double check and triple check, especially when it involves somebody's safety or health, right? Or lives are at risk. You can't take those chances, right? Ask somebody. And that's probably one of the things that some folks need to do when you get in the position where you're not sure. Ask a question. Don't be afraid to ask a question. You'll never feel bad about doing that if you save somebody from getting hurt. So that's one of the things I tell the young folks on location. Ask the question, stay away. If you don't understand, don't say you understand it and you don't understand it. I'd rather you tell me you don't. That tells me a lot more about you than telling me you do know, and then something goes south or somebody gets hurt.
Okay, so owning up to admitting maybe that you don't really fully understand something is very important then.
It is, but one thing that's interesting, it's very different from people that are early in their career and very different from people that are late in their career. At some point, there's a transition from when you're one of the youngest in the industry to one of the more senior, more experienced ones. And then the industry expects you to already know things. And that's the trap a lot of folks get into. They're afraid to get help when they may not have experience with something, and people get hurt or mistakes get made and millions of dollars, go out the window. So you're going to have to learn to accept that and learn to get help when you don't understand or you need some help. Knowing what you don't know is sometimes more important than knowing what you do know.
Okay. Because there can be some maybe well-experienced people that maybe don't know everything either. So
that's actually what happens a lot too, especially now in this world where people are getting hired to be specialists in certain parts of an industry. Let's say you're drilling a well and you are a cementing specialist. That's all you do. So you have the drilling folks, you have the drill bit guy, you have the pumping unit guy, and so or guy or gal, and so they're specialists now, and they're not generalists like they're used to. Some of these companies now are wanting very specific skill sets, as opposed to before, where you kind of had to be a jack of all trades and learn a little bit about all of it and be dangerous. And so I feel like some of that is going away. Some of the more senior executive level folks have that in them too, so they understand a little bit about a lot, which I think goes a long way as well.
Yeah, I do agree with that as well. Yeah. So you were mentioning about mentorship. Do you think it is important to get a good mentor?
You know, Absolutely. I think you have to have some sort of mentorship, whether it's an official mentor or someone you look up to, or in the case of me when I was younger, and getting started, I like to study successful people. And so when I run across an executive or a vice president or a manager that I looked up to, who I thought really knew what they were doing and had a great position, a role that maybe I would love to have someday, I found the time to talk to them and ask them how they got there. I wanted to study them. What decisions did they make? How did they get to where the position they are today? I still do that today when I meet people who have traits or qualities, not just professionally but personally, that I want to understand what makes them tick and how they got in that position. As far as professionally, I found a couple of times, to my surprise, that some of the people that I really looked up to and felt like had their stuff together, turns out that they're just in the right place at the right time. So there's a saying in the oil field, probably in the rest of the world, that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But I do firmly believe you have to be good to put yourself in position to be lucky. I personally call that, being blessed. You get blessed. Sometimes it's out of your control, but if you do things the right way, treat people with respect, and hit it hard, good things happen. And sometimes not at the timing you want in the areas that you want, but in the end, I think it all works out pretty well.
Do you really think that things work out for the best no matter what situation you're in?
That's a very general statement. I don't know about for the best, whatever situation. I think you have to come to terms with your own shortcomings and figure out what your weaknesses are and work on those. There's a reason why somebody picked somebody else over you, or there's a reason why you didn't get the job. You have to make a best effort to understand what that was all about. You're gonna have to understand like what they saw, what you were missing. Like, so feedback's important. That's the only way you're gonna know.
Okay, but how do you ask for feedback? Would you just go up to your boss, make an appointment, or how would you go about doing
I
that?
mean, depends on the company you work for, but in my company here at Crescent, we have an open door policy. Like, so anybody can come in anytime and ask questions. And not everybody, I'm not saying here specifically, but across the industry, not everyone's going to talk like that. It really depends on your manager and how open and honest they are. But sometimes asking a peer, someone at your level, or maybe another manager in another part, it'd be worth, interacting with them and asking them, hey, what do you think I could do better? What do you think I could improve? But you do have to go seek it out. Most of the time, people are not going to come to you to tell you that you're deficient in an area. You'll just see the results of that. So you do have to, take a look in the mirror and go about it that way.
Okay, but that can be, yeah, but some people might think, especially for the younger ones, they might think that if they're going asking for advice on how they can improve, they might think that they might feel maybe unsure of themselves in front of their management, which is not really going to
No,
be good.
that's true. But why don't you try doing that 15 years into your career and being frustrated then when it really matters, when you have children at home and a mortgage and college kids and things of that nature? You might as well figure this out in the first 3 years of your career, when we're still getting to know each other and we're still getting to know the industry, than to find out when you're already all the way in a certain point and then decide, well, this is as good as it's going to get for me. So, I mean, I have no problem with that. Like I said, and that may be the catalyst why some people change jobs, is that somebody may value you better outside of your company than in your company. And that's how sometimes things happen in this industry. I'm not advising that's the way to go, but nobody's going to look out for you like you're going to look out for yourself. And that's one thing I've learned in this industry. I think that goes across multiple industries. No one's going to look out for you like you're going to look out for you. But having a good mentor and having management that's supportive of you, that respects you and that gives you opportunities to succeed and puts you in positions to win, is important as well.
Do you really believe that sometimes you can, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, actually. I was going to say, do you really believe that you can stay in a company too long where you might be valued outside more than inside.
Well, I mean, how do most job changes happen? I mean, most job changes are people leaving to another company. Hardly ever. I would say there's probably more people leaving companies than there is promoted. There's only so many positions at the top, right? And so someone else will value you more than maybe your existing company. And that's just speaking generally. There's a lot of companies like that. Like I've worked for a number of companies, and I'm sure, a lot of my peers have as well, and maybe even some folks that graduated as recently in the last 2, 3 years. Have had one or two roles. And I think at the end of the day, it's what value does your employer see in you versus what someone else thinks that they see in you. So.
Okay. But then sometimes you can almost say that your current employer may not really appreciate what you do until you're not doing it anymore.
And that's why as a manager of people, like you have to communicate with your people, right? One thing is looking at it from the employee side, but another thing is looking at it from the leader. Like you have to spend some time communicating, and I wholeheartedly believe in transparent leadership. You sit down with your employees and you talk, and you're candid and you're honest. One of the ways to do that what I noticed, it was something that maybe wasn't done as often with me, is that a senior leader had a project, but they would never explain what it is they needed. They just said, go get me this, or I need you to bring me that. And they never taught you and told you what they were building. For example, they'd say, go get a brick and I need some sand. And you're like, what are you trying to build? Are you building a house? Metaphorically, of course. And they just would never really tell you what it was, but you're bringing pieces, and, you just want to stop and say, look, if you tell me what it is you're trying to build, I can help you build it. And so that was very frustrating for me in one career stop. So much that now when I meet with my team, I show them a picture of the quote unquote house that I want to build. Like, this is what I'm trying to build. This is a project. Can you help me build it? And then we start talking about, well, have you thought about this, Robert? What if we do this? And so I think that gets them thinking, and it makes the job a lot more satisfying because you see what the end goal is and you're helping them build that, as opposed to go get me a brick and not ever knowing what we're doing.
I think that's amazing advice. Amazing advice. So tell me, have you had any career disasters?
Everybody's had career disasters. If you worked in this industry long enough, you're going to have things go south. That's just the nature of oil and gas. The point is to minimize as much loss as possible, and no loss of health or people, right? But I'll tell you, I've learned a lot in my career, and what's been very eye-opening for me is I've learned a lot of what not to do. There's a lot of learnings from what to do, but the most important lessons for me was what not to do. Through process of elimination, you really learn some things. We do have in this industry a habit of making the same mistakes over and over again, especially now where you have great shift change and people leave the industry, and you get younger folks in there, and some of the more experienced say, they go off into the sunset. You find the industry making some of the same mistakes of the past. And so everybody thinks they're a great poker player. Everybody thinks they're fast enough to be in the left lane. But sometimes just asking questions and studying others and what they're doing is the best way, right? You see what people do, but you don't always know the why. So, I've had several, incidents. In one case, there was a incident on location when I worked for a service company where we were essentially out of hours. We were overtime, and we were running on 26 hours of work straight without sleep. Around the same time, we were asking our senior management, can we get some relief? People are tired. There's a lot of heavy iron moving around. Sure enough, the response was no. We got you. We got another job for you after this. As soon as you get done, we'll have someone pick you up and drive you to the next location. And eventually, what ended up happening is we had an incident with equipment. It was equipment failure, and it didn't go well. And when it all came down to it, the senior management at the time, I basically took ownership. I'm responsible. I'm the person on the ground, and so I took ownership of that incident. Said I was on location, I should have shut it down, so on and so forth. The very next week, I got a job offer from that client that we were doing work on it because they had found out that I had taken ownership of that situation. Even though I had asked for help, they hired me. And so I thought they didn't know that. I went to work for the company where we had kind of made a mess. And they said, oh, we knew exactly who you were, and this is exactly why we reached out. So I thought that was really interesting. Sometimes, like I said, things go south, but you learn a lot from that. And fate has a funny way to make its way to you, and it worked out really well.
Do you really believe in fate, that things come to you when?
Well, no, like I don't want to get into like philosophical fate versus, divine intervention and things like that. But I do think putting yourself in good positions and like working hard, and like obviously people go to school to get a degree. You don't go to school, you may not get a degree, right? So there are some things you have to do that you should be doing if you want to have success. You just looking at it from an athletic perspective, and I've coached kids in my career, is like you got to put in the work. Long story short, nothing's going to be given to you. You're going to have to put in the work, and it's going to be hard work, and it's not going to be fun sometimes. But if you do that, a lot of times people recognize that, and your performance will show it. So you're essentially working to get to the point where you have an opportunity to lead, or an opportunity to succeed, or showcase your talents. But I don't know how much of it's fate. I mean, I tend to think that there's a little bit of divine intervention, because there's some things that went my way in my career. It probably should not have gone my way in my career if I really had to be honest about it. But I'm going to make the best of it for sure. But at the same time, I've been doing my best to recognize talented people in this industry who have that, and give them an opportunity to shine.
I think that is a really important message as well. A really important message. So I was going to ask you, so what advice would you give to any young graduate trying to enter into the energy sector?
I would tell them, if they're graduating with a degree interested in the energy sector, is to don't be afraid to work for a service company. Don't be afraid to start on the ground, because I'll tell you, I started on the ground, and some of the lessons I learned from those folks and things that they taught me were instrumental in my successes later in the career. And too many times coming out of school, everybody wants to sit behind a desk and be the engineer for Exxon, or be the engineer for Chevron or Shell or Crescent, but there's a lot of learnings that have to happen before that. And some folks do get an opportunity to sit behind the desk, but I'll tell you, when it comes down to doing some of the work, the folks that spend some time on the ground have a good understanding of how things go together, and what can and can't do, and they learn how to build relationships with our field personnel. And the field is really what makes the industry go round. Without good field people, none of this matters. You can put out the best procedure, but if your field folks don't trust you, or they don't think you're competent, it's not going to work. So I would tell young folks is to don't give up. This industry is very cyclic. The prices go up and down. There's always going to be a need for good people. And there's a lot of different parts of the industry that are kicking off right now, like geothermal. CCUS is very much something that's active. There's a lot of different spin-offs of energy-related things. And if you want to get into energy, then you got nuclear. Like that's what, like I said, my son's doing. That's exciting stuff. It's come a long way. So I would focus on what you can do and worry about the things you can control, but don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to take a job that maybe is not ideal and checks all the boxes. When prices are down, you want to stay in the industry, you want to have an opportunity to contribute. And then when prices turn around and opportunities open up, you're sitting in a pretty good spot. And I think that's been kind of the story of my career.
I think that's amazing advice, actually. Amazing advice. Right, I'm gonna leave it there, and I think that we had an amazing discussion. One of my favorites, I think, actually. Okay, that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Robert for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.